Hey there, I'm Caleb Whitaker. I used to believe that if you worked hard, kept your word, and treated people right, you'd always be valued. It's a simple code, one I learned early and tried to live by, especially in my career. I've always been more of a behind-the-scenes kind of guy, tall and maybe a bit imposing with these broad shoulders, but my aim was always to build, not to loom. My dark brown hair's got a bit of gray in it now, a testament to the years, I suppose. I never sought the spotlight, never chased the corner office with the best view. But for 7 years at Veltri Software, the company I'd poured my heart into, I was the one quietly bringing in over half the revenue. I helped build it client by client, handshake by handshake. That is, until one crisp autumn morning, I walked into a scheduled meeting and, less than 10 minutes later, walked out jobless. Just like that. No real warning, no space for discussion. I wasn't angry, not in that hot, explosive way. It was more of a cold burn, a deep, sudden understanding. But even then, standing on the sidewalk with a box of my things, I knew they'd made a mistake they wouldn't be able to undo. And if you've ever thought that quietly doing your job well, with integrity, would somehow protect you from being suddenly expendable, well, stick around. You might find that sometimes the quietest values, the ones built on trust, end up creating the loudest, most undeniable impact. That morning, the air in Minneapolis had that sharp, clean bite of approaching winter. I remember the way the sunlight slanted through the tall windows of the Veltri building, usually a sight that filled me with a quiet sense of accomplishment. But that day something felt off. There was a new name on my calendar for a 10 o'clock, Darren Colton. He was the new VP of Sales, hired from out east, all flash and buzzwords. I'd only met him briefly a couple of times. I walked into that conference room, the one usually reserved for major client presentations, and Darren was already there, perched on the edge of a sleek leather chair. He had this overly bright smile, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. The room felt cold, despite the sun. "Caleb, good to see you. Grab a seat," he said, his voice a little too loud for the space. There was a single file folder on the gleaming mahogany table in front of him.
No coffee, no notepads.
Just that folder. I sat, a knot tightening in my stomach. I just closed out our best quarter ever. The numbers were phenomenal, driven largely by the long-term contracts I'd nurtured, some for nearly the entire 7 years I'd been there. I expected a strategy session, maybe even a commendation. Instead, Darren cleared his throat, that smile still plastered on. "Caleb," he began, his tone shifting to something rehearsed, almost robotic. "As you know, the company is moving in a new strategic direction. We're restructuring for enhanced synergy and proactive market alignment." I just looked at him, my own eyes, I'm sure, calm but searching. He avoided my gaze, flipping open the folder. "And as part of this realignment," he continued, "your role as Director of Business Development has been eliminated. Effective immediately." The words hung there. Eliminated. Not "we're changing your role," not "we need you to focus elsewhere." Eliminated. It was like a punch, but the pain was dull, spreading slow. I thought of my father. He'd worked at a milling plant, a loyal man, a good man. He died in a workplace accident, a consequence of cut corners, of numbers valued over people. That loss, it carved something deep in me. A vow to always prioritize trust, to ensure people felt seen, valued. And here I was, being told I was a line item easily erased. "I see," I said. My voice was steady, quieter than his. It had to be. "Good men don't need to shout," Dad always said. "True worth reveals itself over time." Shouting wouldn't change the rehearsed script Darren was following. He pushed a standard severance package across the table. "The company appreciates your contributions," he recited, the words utterly devoid of sincerity. Contributions. 7 years of my life of building Velturi's reputation from the ground up, reduced to contributions. There was no thank you, no acknowledgement of the record quarter, nothing about the clients who trusted me, who trusted Velturi because of me. Your access will be revoked at noon, he added, finally meeting my eyes for a split second before looking away again, towards the window, as if admiring the view. HR will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. The injustice of it. It wasn't just the firing. It was the coldness, the utter lack of respect, the implication that I was just a cog, easily replaced by a newer, shinier one. The smile he offered then, as I stood up, was the worst part. It was the smile of a man who thought he'd just won something, who saw people as pawns. I didn't say anything more. There was nothing to say to a man like that. I simply nodded, turned, and walked out of that cold, sterile room. Walking back to my office, the escort from HR a few steps behind me, a young woman who looked genuinely uncomfortable, was surreal. The usual office buzz seemed distant, muted. People glanced up, then quickly looked away, a mixture of curiosity and unease on their faces. News like this, it travels fast in an office. I packed my few personal items, a photo of my wife, Sarah, and our 2 kids, a couple of well-thumbed books on leadership that focused on ethics, not just profit, a small, worn wooden carving my daughter had made for me. It didn't take long. My work, my real work, wasn't in the trinkets on my desk. It was in the relationships I'd built, the trust I'd earned. Carrying that small box, I walked out of the Velturi building for the last time. The crisp autumn air hit my face, and this time, it felt different. Not energizing, but stark. I wasn't angry, not in the way that makes you want to scream or break things. It was a quiet rage, a deep, internal sting of betrayal, not just for myself, but for the principle of the thing. They hadn't just fired an employee. They dismissed a foundational piece of their own success. And as I stood there on the sidewalk, the city noise washing over me, I had this unshakable feeling. They had no idea what they'd just done. They truly didn't. To understand why that dismissal cut so deep, you have to understand how Velturi, or at least my part of it, was built. It wasn't on aggressive sales tactics or slick marketing campaigns. It was built on handshakes, on shared coffees, on remembering someone's kid's graduation or the name of their old Labrador. It was built on trust. I joined Velturi Software when it was little more than a handful of brilliant coders with a groundbreaking idea and almost no market presence. We were in a cramped office space above a bakery. You could smell fresh bread around 10 every morning. It was exciting, that startup energy, the feeling that we were creating something new, something that could genuinely help businesses. My title then was something generic like Client Relations Manager, but really I was everything from sales to account management to listening ear. My approach was simple. My father, before the accident at the mill, had always told me, "Caleb, people will forget what you said. They might forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel." That became my mantra. I didn't have a long list of existing corporate contacts back then. So I started with people I knew. Old college friends who were starting their own businesses. Guys I'd played hockey with who were now in middle management at local companies. People from my church, from community groups. I wasn't selling them software. I was offering them a partnership, a solution I genuinely believed in, from a person they already knew and, I hoped, trusted. I remember one of my first big clients, a logistics company run by a man named Frank Peterson. Frank was old school, skeptical of new tech. We met for coffee, not in his office, but at a little diner he liked. We talked about fishing for half an hour before he even asked about the software. I didn't push. I listened. I learned about his frustrations with his current systems, the inefficiencies that were costing him. Only then did I talk about how Velturi could help, tailoring it specifically to his problems, not giving him a canned pitch. He signed a small contract initially. A year later, his company was one of our biggest accounts. Not because I'd wowed him with technical jargon, but because he knew I was looking out for his interests, that I'd be there if something went wrong. That's how it went, client by client. I remembered birthdays. I sent a note when a client's parent passed away. If someone mentioned their kid was in a school play, I'd ask how it went next time we spoke. These weren't tricks. It was genuine care. I believed that business, at its heart, is about human connection. The software was the tool, but the relationship was the foundation. I'd spend hours understanding their business, their challenges, their goals. I wasn't just selling a product. I was integrating Velturi into their success. And because of that, loyalty grew. These weren't just accounts on a spreadsheet. They were partnerships. Many of them became friends. We celebrated their wins. When a client landed a major contract of their own, partly thanks to the efficiencies our software provided, I'd be genuinely thrilled for them. We were growing Velturi, yes, but we were also helping other businesses thrive. That felt good. Felt right. It was a quiet way of working, perhaps. No shouting from the rooftops, no aggressive, chest-thumping sales tactics. Just steady, consistent, reliable service and genuine human connection. My father lost his life because a company saw him as a number. I was determined that anyone who worked with me, or the part of Velturi I represented, would feel like a person valued and respected. Over 7 years, that network of trust expanded. Referrals came in not because we offered kickbacks, but because satisfied clients told their colleagues, "You need to talk to Caleb at Velturi. He'll take care of you." We won awards for customer satisfaction, for growth. And through it all, I kept my approach the same. The company grew, we moved into that big, shiny building downtown, but the principles remained. For me, at least, I was bringing in, year after year, more than half of Velturi's total revenue. Not through aggressive tactics, but through the steady cultivation of these deep, trusting relationships. It was a testament, I thought, to the idea that true worth, true strength in business doesn't need to be loud or flashy. It just needs to be real. And that, apparently, was something the new guard, the Darren Coltons of the world, simply couldn't comprehend. Darren Colton arrived like a weather system. One day it was business as usual, the next, the barometer had dropped, and the air was charged with an uncomfortable energy. He was everything I wasn't. Slicked back hair, expensive suits that looked like they'd never seen a wrinkle, and a Bluetooth earpiece that seemed permanently attached to his head. He walked fast, talked fast, and his vocabulary was a fire hose of the latest corporate buzzwords. Synergy, optimization, disruption, paradigm shift. It all sounded impressive if you didn't listen too closely. If you did, you realized it was mostly air. His office was down the hall from mine, but he rarely seemed to be in it. He was always striding somewhere, phone pressed to his ear, or in meetings with the higher-ups, including Marianne Wright, our CEO. Marianne had always been a bit distant, more focused on the investors and the big picture, but she'd always seemed to respect the results my team and I delivered. I figured she'd brought Darren in to shake things up, to bring a new dynamism. I just didn't realize how much he intended to shake, or what he intended to break. The first changes were subtle. New reporting metrics. Suddenly, everything was about call volume, conversion rates, and average deal size, crunched into complex spreadsheets. The human element, the years of trust building, couldn't be quantified in his models, so it was largely ignored. My weekly team meetings, once focused on client needs and creative problem solving, started to include mandatory sessions on Darren's new sales acceleration framework. It was all about aggressive closing techniques, upselling, and standardized scripts. My team, most of whom I'd hired and mentored in my own relationship-first philosophy, looked at me with confused, worried eyes. I tried to talk to Darren. I remember scheduling a meeting, bringing him data that showed our highest value, Longest-term clients were the ones cultivated through patient relationship building, not quick-pressure tactics. I explained that our client base was unique, built on personal connections. He listened or pretended to, nodding, occasionally interjecting with a right, appreciate the legacy perspective, Caleb, but we need to scale. We need to be agile. Legacy perspective. That's what 7 years of success had become. Then came the reassignments. Some of my key accounts, clients I'd known for years, were suddenly shifted to new salespeople, people Darren had hired, who followed his script to the letter. The explanation was always about load balancing or strategic realignment. I'd get calls from these clients. Caleb, what's going on? This new guy, he doesn't understand our business. He's just trying to sell me stuff I don't need. I'd try to smooth things over, reassure them, but my hands were increasingly tied. Darren started bypassing me altogether. New sales strategies would be rolled out company-wide without my input, even though business development was supposedly my domain. Marketing materials changed, becoming louder, more generic, losing the nuanced understanding of our clients that we'd prided ourselves on. I felt like I was watching someone systematically dismantle a carefully constructed house, brick by brick, convinced they could build it faster and shinier with flimsy, mass-produced panels. The unease in the office was palpable. My team felt it. I saw the stress in their faces, the frustration of being asked to operate in ways that felt inauthentic and, frankly, less effective with the clients they knew so well. I did my best to shield them, to advocate for common sense, but Darren had Marianne's ear. He was the shiny new thing, promising rapid growth, and his spreadsheets, full of projections and aggressive targets, apparently looked very convincing on paper. I remember one afternoon, walking past the big glass wall of Marian Wright's office. She was in there with Darren, both of them looking at a large screen displaying charts and graphs. Darren was animated, pointing, talking, and Marianne was nodding, a small smile on her face. He had her convinced. I felt a chill go down my spine. It wasn't just about my role anymore. It was about the soul of the company, the very thing that had made us successful. I wasn't a confrontational guy. My strength was in building, in connecting, in quiet resilience. But I also wasn't a fool. I saw the writing on the wall. I started documenting everything, not out of malice, but out of a need to understand, to have a clear record of the changes and their impact. Emails, policy changes, client feedback. The sense of betrayal wasn't just personal. It felt like a betrayal of the clients who had put their faith in Whitaker, in us. I was being isolated, my expertise disregarded, my relationships undermined. And the man orchestrating it all, Darren Colton, he only saw numbers. He never once asked about the people behind them. He never understood that our best numbers came from treating people like people. That was his fatal flaw, and ultimately Whitaker's too. The hours immediately after being fired were a blur of quiet shock and a strange, unexpected calm. Sarah, my wife, was incredible. She listened. She raged quietly for me, and then she said, "Their loss, Caleb, their profound loss." Her faith in me was like an anchor. The kids, when they found out, were mostly confused why Dad wasn't going to the big building anymore. Explaining it to them in a way that didn't sound bitter was a challenge. I'd barely had time to process it all, to even start thinking about what came next, when my phone started ringing. And then it didn't stop. It was like a dam had burst. The first call was from Jim Henderson, CEO of a manufacturing firm, one of my oldest clients. "Caleb, what in the world is going on? I just got off the phone with some new guy from Whitaker. Said you'd decided to pursue other opportunities?" Sounded like he was reading from a script. "That doesn't sound like you." I was honest but professional. "Jim, my time at Whitaker has come to an end. It wasn't my decision, but it's where things stand." There was a pause. Then Jim said, "Well, that's just damn foolishness on their part. You are Velturi as far as I'm concerned. And that was the sentiment over and over again. My phone buzzed constantly for the next 48 hours. Emails flooded my personal inbox. Client after client. Caleb, heard you left. What does this mean for us? We signed with Velturi because of you, Caleb. I'm not comfortable dealing with anyone else there. Especially not this Colton fellow. Some were angry at Velturi, some were worried. All of them were incredibly supportive of me personally. It was humbling, honestly. All those years of trying to do right by people, of building that trust. It was coming back to me not in dollars and cents but in loyalty. My father's words echoed in my mind. True worth reveals itself over time. I didn't badmouth Velturi. I didn't need to. I simply told them the truth. My role had been eliminated. I thanked them for their partnership over the years. I didn't try to poach anyone. I didn't have to lift a finger to sabotage anything Darren or Velturi were doing. They were doing a fine job of that themselves by alienating the very people who paid their bills. And then, get this, less than a week after I was fired, I got a call from David Miller, the CEO of Innovate Solutions. They were a well-respected competitor, a company I'd always admired for their ethical approach and their focus on innovation, not just aggressive sales. Caleb, David said, his voice warm and direct. I heard what happened over at Velturi. Frankly, I was shocked, but not entirely surprised, given some of the noise I've been hearing about their new direction. He didn't beat around the bush. We've been looking to expand our enterprise division. We need someone with your experience, your reputation, and frankly, your integrity. We're prepared to offer you a senior leadership role, full autonomy to build your team and manage your accounts the way you see fit. No ridiculous metrics, just results and happy clients. Felt like a lifeline, but more than that, it felt like validation. Innovate Solutions wasn't just offering me a job. They were offering me a home for my values, a place where relationship-driven success was understood and appreciated. We met, we talked, and it just felt right. I accepted. The news spread quickly. When clients I'd spoken to earlier found out I'd landed at Innovate, the calls started again. This time, they were different. Caleb, you're at Innovate now? Can we move our business with you? How do we get out of our contract with Velturi? Their service has already gone downhill. I didn't actively recruit a single Velturi client. I simply answered their questions honestly. I told them about Innovate Solutions, about their values, their products. The choice was entirely theirs. But one by one, a significant number of my former key accounts began the process of transitioning their business. It wasn't Caleb Whitaker stealing clients. It was clients choosing to follow the relationship, the trust, the person who'd always put their needs first. It was a natural consequence of Velturi's decision to discard the one thing that truly anchored those accounts, the genuine human connection I had painstakingly built. The vindication was quiet, but oh man, it was powerful. It wasn't about revenge. It was about the simple, undeniable truth that genuine relationships will always outlast job titles and corporate maneuvering. The transition for those clients who chose to move from Velturi to Innovate Solutions should have been straightforward. These were businesses making a conscious decision about who they wanted to partner with. But it quickly became clear that Darren Colton and Velturi weren't going to let go easily. The calls I started getting from these clients shifted from relief at finding me to frustration and anger at Velturi's tactics. Caleb, Velturi is stonewalling us. One client, Sarah Chun, who ran a rapidly growing tech startup, told me, her voice tight with exasperation, they're refusing to export our historical data in a usable format. They claim it's proprietary, even though our contract clearly states we own our data. Another client, an older gentleman named Marcus Thorne who owned a chain of specialty retail stores, called to say Velturi was suddenly invoking obscure clauses in his contract, threatening early termination penalties if he moved his business. penalties that were never mentioned when he was happily renewing year after year with me. It was ugly. Darren, it seemed, was panicking. His sales acceleration framework wasn't accelerating anything but client departures. And instead of addressing the root cause, the loss of trust, the poor service, he was resorting to bullying and obstruction. This wasn't just unprofessional. In some cases, it bordered on unethical, possibly illegal. They were holding client data hostage, misinterpreting contract language, and creating an atmosphere of fear and intimidation. This I couldn't ignore. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about protecting the clients who had placed their trust in me, and by extension, now in Innovate Solutions. This wasn't revenge. This was about ensuring fair play. My quiet resilience had its limits when I saw others being harmed by dishonesty. So I started to gather information, carefully, methodically, just like I used to research a client's needs. I asked clients who were experiencing these issues to forward me the email chains with Velturi. I documented the specific tactics being used, the refusal to provide data, the sudden enforcement of previously unmentioned penalties, the aggressive and often misleading communication from Velturi's new account reps, undoubtedly coached by Darren. Some clients, who were particularly incensed, had even recorded calls where Velturi representatives made vague threats or outright misstatements about contractual obligations. I compiled everything into a clear, concise dossier. No emotion, just facts, dates, names, and direct evidence of Velturi's obstructive behavior. It painted a very clear picture of a company actively trying to punish clients for exercising their right to choose their service provider. There was a pattern of behavior that was undeniable. I took this dossier to David Miller, the CEO of Innovate, and to our own legal team. David, I said, this isn't about winning clients. This is about Velturi creating serious roadblocks for businesses that want to transition, and it's harming them. We need to support these clients. David reviewed the information, his expression growing more serious with each page. Our head of legal, a sharp woman named Eleanor Vance, was meticulous in her examination. Caleb, this is quite something, Eleanor said, finally looking up. They're playing hardball, and frankly, they're playing dirty. Innovate's legal team immediately drafted cease and desist letters to Velturi regarding specific client data issues. They also provided guidance and support to clients who were facing contractual bullying, helping them understand their rights and craft appropriate responses. We weren't looking for a fight, but we weren't going to stand by and watch Velturi abuse its former customers. My core belief that good men don't need to shout still held. We weren't shouting. We were using the truth, clearly and firmly, documented and delivered through the proper channels. It was a different kind of strength, the strength of integrity, of intellectual honesty, and it felt right. It was empowering to know that we could fight back against these shadowy tactics, not by stooping to their level, but by shining a light on them. As more clients successfully navigated the choppy waters of leaving Velturi and settling in with us at Innovate Solutions, I started to notice a common thread in my conversations with them. Beyond their relief, there was a shared frustration, a sense of having been processed, rather than partnered with, by Velturi under its new regime. They were tired of being sold to, of being seen as mere entries on a sales dashboard. An idea began to form. It wasn't about Velturi, not directly. It was about connection, about fostering the kind of community I believed in. I decided to host a few small, informal industry lunches. Nothing fancy, just good food and good conversation at a quiet restaurant downtown. I invited a mix of my long-standing clients who had transitioned to Innovate and some newer ones who were just getting to know us. My only agenda was to get good people in a room together. The first lunch was with about 8 people from different sectors: logistics, tech, retail, healthcare. I made a brief welcome, thanked them for their business and their trust, and then I just let the conversation flow. I didn't bring up Velturi. I didn't need to. After the initial pleasantries, Sarah Chun, the tech startup CEO, mentioned offhand some of the data migration headaches she'd finally overcome. Across the table, Marcus Thorne, the retail chain owner, chimed in. You too? They tried to tell me my customer purchase history was their intellectual property. Can you believe that? And just like that, the floodgates opened. Not in an angry, Veltri-bashing way, but more like a support group. People shared their experiences, the bizarre excuses they'd heard, the pressure tactics they'd faced. There were nods of recognition, sympathetic smiles, even a few wry laughs at the sheer absurdity of some of Velturi's maneuvers. What was amazing to me was the realization that dawned on them. They weren't alone. Each of them had felt isolated in their struggle with Velturi, thinking perhaps they were the only ones getting this kind of treatment. Said Frank Peterson, my old client from the logistics company, leaning back in his chair. We all got similar-sounding legal letters from them when we tried to clarify our contract terms for leaving. Almost like they were using a template. Someone else added, and their new account people all sounded like robots, reading from the same script. Without any steering from me, they began to compare notes more substantively. They talked about specific contract clauses Velturi had tried to use against them, the legal interpretations their own lawyers had offered, the strategies that had worked in getting Velturi to back down or release data. One client, who had a particularly strong legal team, offered to share a sanitized version of their correspondence with Velturi, which had successfully countered some of their more egregious claims. It was incredible to watch. This wasn't a rebellion I was fomenting. It was organic. It was the power of shared experience, of collective resilience. These were smart, capable business leaders who were tired of being treated poorly. By the end of that first lunch, they were already talking about forming an informal alliance, a network to share information and best practices, not just about dealing with difficult vendors, but about other industry challenges too. I hosted a few more of these lunches, and the same thing happened each time. Connections were forged. People who were competitors in some areas found common ground in their desire for respectful, ethical business partnerships. They started helping each other, offering advice, even referrals to good lawyers or consultants. It was the antithesis of Darren Colton's world of cutthroat tactics and transactional relationships. This was about community, about lifting each other up. I just sat back and facilitated, making introductions, ensuring everyone felt heard. It was inspiring. It showed me, yet again, that when you treat people with respect, when you empower them with truth and connection, they can achieve remarkable things. It wasn't about revenge against Velturi. It was about fostering something positive and strong in its place. It was unity without manipulation, and it was far more powerful than any spreadsheet. Several months had passed since my departure from Velturi. I was settled at Innovate Solutions, my team was growing, and our client base, a healthy mix of those who had followed me and new ones we were acquiring, was thriving. We were building something solid, based on the principles I'd always cherished. Velturi, on the other hand, was becoming a bit of a recurring topic in industry whispers, and not in a good way. Rumors of declining customer satisfaction, missed targets, and a general sense of internal chaos were starting to circulate. Then, one afternoon, my assistant buzzed me. "Caleb, Marian Wright is on the line for you." From Velturi. Marian Wright, the CEO. The one who had presumably signed off on my dismissal, who had backed Darren Colton's disastrous strategies. The one who, in all my years at Velturi, had barely given me more than a polite nod in the hallway, despite the fact I was bringing in over half her company's revenue. My heart gave a little thump, not of anxiety, but of curiosity, I suppose. "Put her through," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Caleb? This Marian Wright." Her voice was different from how I remembered it from company presentations. Less confident, a little strained. "Thank you for taking my call." "Marianne," I replied, keeping my tone neutral, calm. "What can I do for you?" There was a pause. I could almost hear her taking a breath. "Caleb, Valtteri made a mistake. A significant mistake. Letting you go was a profound error in judgment." I waited. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't need to. My silence was probably more eloquent. "Things haven't been going well since the restructuring," she admitted, the corporate euphemism sounding hollow even to her, I imagined. "Darren Colton is no longer with the company." Well, that wasn't a surprise. Men like Darren rarely survive the messes they create. We've lost a number of key accounts. Our reputation has suffered. "Caleb, I want to ask you to consider coming back to Valtteri. We'll give you whatever title you want. Vice President, Senior Vice President. Name your salary, your terms. We need you." It was quite the offer. The kind of offer that, a year ago, might have felt like the ultimate vindication. But now, I thought of my team at Innovate, the trust David Miller had placed in me, the positive culture we were building. I thought of the clients who had weathered the storm with me. "Marianne," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "I appreciate the offer.
I truly do.
But I'm very happy where I am. Innovate Solutions is a good company, and we're building something special here. I'm not looking to leave." I could hear the disappointment in her sigh. "I understand," she said quietly. I had to ask. We ended the call politely. I hung up, not with a sense of triumph, but with a quiet feeling of completion regarding that chapter. The desire for them to simply realize their mistake had been fulfilled. But it wasn't over. About 3 weeks later, Marian Wright called again. This time, her tone was even more urgent. "Caleb," she said, dispensing with formalities, "Valtteri is in serious trouble. We're facing significant financial challenges. Our investors are concerned." She paused. "We're exploring all options, and one of those options is an acquisition." I listened, saying nothing. "Innovate Solutions is strong," she continued. "You're doing well. Your market position is growing. Caleb, would Innovate be interested in acquiring Valtteri?" Now, that was a turn I hadn't fully anticipated. An acquisition. My new company buying my old one. The irony was thick. David Miller and I had several long discussions. Valtteri still had some good underlying technology, despite the mismanagement. And there were still some good people there, adrift in the chaos. An acquisition, if handled correctly, could be a strategic move for Innovate. I went back to Marianne with our position. "Yes, Marianne," I said. "Innovate Solutions would be prepared to discuss an acquisition, but under one absolute, non-negotiable condition." "What is it?" she asked, her voice hopeful. "A complete cultural overhaul of what Valtteri has become," I stated. "Ironclad commitments to employee treatment, to ethical client engagement. No one there will ever be treated as expendable. No one will be discarded the way I was, or the way good employees and loyal clients have been treated since. We build on trust or we don't build at all. That's the only way this works." There was a long silence on her end. Then softly, "Agreed, Caleb. Agreed." It wasn't about ego, about winning. It was about ensuring that the values I'd fought for, the principles I believed in, would become the foundation going forward. It was a quiet form of justice, a healing that came not from retribution, but from the chance to rebuild something broken and make it better, stronger, and more humane. Walking back into the Valtteri offices a few weeks later was an experience. The Innovate Solutions logo was already being prepped for the main reception wall. I wasn't walking in as a returning hero or a conquering king. I was there as part of the Innovate leadership team, tasked with overseeing a smooth integration of the two companies. My role was to help salvage what was good, reassure the remaining Valtteri employees who were understandably anxious, and begin the process of instilling Innovate's culture, our culture of respect and trust. The atmosphere was subdued, a stark contrast to the artificial, high-octane buzz Darren Colton had tried to inject. People looked up as I walked through, some with curiosity, some with a hint of apprehension, a few with a glimmer of recognition and, perhaps, hope. I saw a few familiar faces, people who had been with Velturi during my time, who had weathered the storm. I made a point of stopping to speak with them, offering a calm smile, a word of reassurance. Later that day, we held an all-hands meeting with the remaining Velturi staff and the Innovate team members who would be working with them. Marion Wright made a brief, dignified statement about the acquisition, then introduced David Miller, and then David introduced me, outlining my role in the transition. When I stepped up to the microphone, the room was quiet. I looked out at their faces. I didn't rehash the past. I didn't mention Darren Colton. I didn't talk about my own dismissal. There was no need. My presence there said enough. Instead, I talked about the future. I talked about Innovate's philosophy. We are a company built on relationships, I said, my voice steady and clear. Relationships with our clients and relationships with each other. That's our bedrock. We succeed because we trust each other, because we empower each other, and because we never forget that behind every contract, every project, every line of code, there are people. We exist because of those people, because of those relationships, and not because of spreadsheets. I saw some nods. I saw some of the tension leave a few shoulders. It was a simple message, but it was heartfelt, and it was the absolute truth of how Innovate operated, and how this new, combined entity would operate. After the meeting, as I was walking through the main office floor, I passed by what used to be my old office. The nameplate was gone, of course. Through the glass, I could see it was currently empty, a generic space waiting for a new occupant. For a fleeting moment, I paused. I saw the ghost of my old desk, the faint indentation in the carpet where my chair used to be. 7 years of my life had been spent in that space, building something I believed in. But I didn't linger. I didn't look back with regret, or anger, or even triumph. That was the past. My path was forward. There was work to do, a new chapter to write, one based on the hard-won lessons of the old. I walked on, a new man in an old place, but with a renewed sense of purpose. The quiet values, the ones about trust and integrity, they hadn't just survived. They had prevailed. And now they would be the foundation for something even better. Someone once asked me, "Did it feel good to walk back in and take over the company that pushed you out?" I smiled when they asked that. It was a genuine smile, peaceful. Not because I felt like I'd won some kind of corporate game. I never wanted to play those games. I smiled because I didn't let their worst actions, their cold dismissal, bring out the worst in me. I stayed true to what I believed. I didn't need to rehang any old awards or seek validation for the past. That wasn't the point. The real satisfaction came from the opportunity to build something new, something better, from the ashes of the old. A place where good, hardworking people would never have to fear being suddenly discarded, where every handshake, every client call, every promise made would actually mean something again. That felt more valuable than any personal victory. And if you've ever been overlooked, pushed aside, or felt like you were replaced in something you poured your heart and soul into, please remember this. Your true worth isn't tied to their recognition or their approval. It's not defined by a job title or a spot on an org chart. Your worth is in the trust you build, the integrity you maintain, and in the people who still believe in you, even when the noise of politics and power plays fades away. Those are the things that last. Thank you for staying with me through this story, for listening. If any part of this resonated with you, if you've ever lived through something similar, I'd be honored if you drop a comment below. I genuinely read every single one. And if you see a piece of your own journey somewhere in this, or if you just believe in the power of quiet justice and the possibility of deeper healing, please hit that subscribe button. We'd love to have you walk with us. You can also support our channel and stories like this through the super thanks button below the video. Sometimes, giving back, even in small ways, is its own kind of redemption, its own way of contributing to a community that understands. Take care.